The courtroom was filled with the low hum of murmured conversations, a restless energy buzzing through the rows of wooden benches. People shifted in their seats, some leaning forward eagerly, others slouching back with bored expressions. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, mingling with the sharp tang of nervous sweat. At the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt, her slender frame wrapped in a modest navy blue suit that did little to hide the intensity in her eyes. She adjusted the stack of papers on the table before her hands steady despite the knot of tension tightening in her stomach. Karoline had spent months preparing for this moment. Her case against Apex Industries, one of the largest corporations in the country, was not just about winning. It was personal. Growing up in a small town downstream from one of Apex's factories, she'd seen firsthand how pollution had poisoned the water supply, leaving families sick and struggling to survive. Now, as an environmental lawyer, she was determined to hold the company accountable for years of illegal dumping and cover-ups. Across the room, Judge Gregory Wells sat behind his elevated bench, his face etched into a permanent scowl. He was a tall man with thinning gray hair and deep lines carved into his forehead, the kind of person who commanded attention without saying a word. His reputation preceded him, gruff, impatient, and notoriously hard to please. Some whispered he was corrupt, but no one dared say it aloud. Today, though, his demeanor seemed even more sour than usual, his dark eyes scanning the room like a hawk searching for prey. "Ms. Leavitt," Judge Wells barked, cutting through the quiet murmur of the crowd. "You may proceed." Karoline took a deep breath and stepped toward the podium, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. She began her opening statement, her voice clear and measured as she laid out the facts of the case. Apex Industries, she explained, had knowingly discharged toxic chemicals into nearby rivers over the past decade, contaminating drinking water and causing widespread health issues among residents. She presented photographs of murky streams, charts showing alarming spikes in cancer rates, and testimonies from victims whose lives had been shattered by illness. At first, Judge Wells listened, or at least pretended to. But after only a few minutes, his patience wore thin. He leaned forward, drumming his fingers on the bench. "Ms. Leavitt," he interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension, "do you really expect us to believe this sob story? It sounds like something straight out of a bad movie." A ripple of unease passed through the gallery. Karoline paused, taken aback by his rudeness, but quickly regained her composure. "With respect, Your Honor," she replied, her voice firm. "This isn't fiction. These are real people suffering because of Apex's actions. I have evidence." "Evidence?" Judge Wells scoffed, cutting her off again. "You call those blurry pictures and hearsay evidence? Spare me the theatrics." He waved a dismissive hand, as if brushing away her arguments like dust on a windowsill. Karoline clenched her jaw, refusing to let his hostility derail her. She pressed on, describing how internal documents obtained through whistleblowers revealed a deliberate pattern of negligence and deceit. According to the files, Apex executives had known about the contamination for years but chose to ignore it, prioritizing profits over human lives. Each word she spoke carried the weight of truth, yet Judge Wells appeared unmoved. In fact, his irritation grew with every sentence. "Idealistic nonsense," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then louder. "Tell me, Ms. Leavitt, do you actually think anyone cares about your little crusade? You're wasting everyone's time here." The insult hit like a slap across the face. Karoline froze, her cheeks flushing with anger. She glanced around the room, meeting the sympathetic gazes of spectators who clearly disagreed with the judge's harsh words. Still, she forced herself to stay calm. Losing her temper wouldn't help her cause. It would only give Judge Wells another reason to discredit her. "I care, Your Honor," she said evenly, meeting his gaze head-on. "And so do the families who've lost loved ones because of Apex's greed. If you don't want to listen, fine, but I won't stop fighting for them." Her response earned a smattering of applause from the audience, quickly silenced by the bailiff's stern glare. Judge Wells, however, looked infuriated, his lips curled into a sneer as he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "How noble of you," he drawled sarcastically. "But let's be honest, you're just another bleeding heart trying to make a name for yourself. Don't insult my intelligence." Daniel Harper watched the exchange unfold from the back row, his pen poised above his notebook. A wiry man in his mid-30s with tousled brown hair and glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Daniel didn't look like someone who could take down a powerful figure like Judge Wells. Yet there was a sharpness to his gaze, a keen awareness that hinted at the journalist lurking beneath his unassuming exterior. For weeks, Daniel had been investigating rumors of corruption surrounding Judge Wells. Anonymous sources claimed the judge accepted bribes in exchange for favorable rulings, though proving it had proven impossible. Until now. Something about the way Wells reacted to Karoline's case struck Daniel as suspicious. Why was he so eager to shut her down? And why did he seem so defensive when she mentioned the leaked documents? As Karoline continued her presentation, Daniel discreetly pulled out his phone and began recording. He zoomed in on Judge Wells, capturing every furrowed brow and disdainful smirk. The footage wasn't perfect, but it might come in handy later. For now, Daniel focused on taking notes, jotting down key moments and sketching a rough timeline of events. When the session adjourned for lunch, Daniel lingered behind, pretending to shuffle through his papers while keeping an eye on Judge Wells. Sure enough, the judge wasted no time exiting the courtroom, his robes billowing dramatically as he strode down the hallway. Daniel followed at a safe distance, careful not to draw attention to himself. Outside, Judge Wells met up with a man waiting near the courthouse steps. Tall and broad-shouldered, with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit, the stranger exuded confidence. They exchanged brief pleasantries before retreating to a nearby cafe, where they sat at a corner table partially hidden from view. Daniel positioned himself strategically, snapping photos with his phone as they talked. Though he couldn't hear their conversation, the body language told him everything he needed to know. Judge Wells leaned in close, speaking urgently while the other man nodded along, occasionally pulling envelopes from his briefcase and sliding them across the table. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. Money changing hands, sealed deals, dirty secrets. Daniel felt a thrill of excitement mixed with dread. This was the break he'd been waiting for, the smoking gun that could bring down a corrupt judge. But exposing the truth wouldn't be easy. Powerful people like Judge Wells didn't go down without a fight. Still, Daniel knew he couldn't turn away now. Not when justice was on the line. Back inside the courthouse, Karoline sat alone in the empty courtroom, staring at her reflection in the polished surface of the defense table. Despite the setbacks, she refused to give up. Whatever happened next, she vowed to keep pushing forward, for the victims, for the truth, and for herself. The lunch break dragged on, the courthouse halls eerily quiet compared to the earlier bustle. Karoline sat alone in a small conference room reserved for attorneys, her mind racing as she replayed Judge Wells's cutting remarks. She stared at the stack of documents in front of her, each page filled with evidence that should have been enough to bury Apex Industries. Yet, instead of feeling confident, she felt a gnawing sense of unease. Something about the way Judge Wells had acted. His dismissive tone, his barely concealed hostility felt off. It wasn't just bias, it was something deeper, more calculated. She sighed and leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The weight of the case pressed down on her, not just because of the stakes, but because of the sheer exhaustion of fighting. An uphill battle, but giving up wasn't an option. For every insult Judge Wells hurled her way, she reminded herself of the faces behind the statistics, the children who couldn't drink clean water, the parents who couldn't afford medical bills, the elderly who had nowhere else to turn. Those people deserved justice, even if it meant enduring humiliation in court. As she gathered her notes, preparing to return to the courtroom, there was a soft knock at the door. Startled, she called out, "Come in." The door creaked open, revealing Daniel Harper. He looked slightly disheveled, his glasses slightly askew, but his expression was serious. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I'm Daniel Harper. I'm a journalist covering this case. Karoline frowned, unsure what to make of the interruption. I'm sorry, Mr. Harper, but I don't have time for interviews right now. We're heading back into session soon. Daniel held up a hand, his voice urgent. This isn't about an interview. I think you need to see something. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times before handing it to her. On the display was a grainy but unmistakable video. Judge Wells sitting at a cafe table with another man. They were speaking animatedly, and at one point the man slid an envelope across the table. Judge Wells picked it up, glanced around furtively, and then tucked it into his jacket pocket. Karoline's eyes widened as she watched the clip. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she looked up at Daniel, her mouth slightly agape. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. I followed Judge Wells during the break, Daniel explained. That man he's meeting with? His name is Richard Cole. He's a lobbyist who works closely with Apex Industries. I think they're bribing him. Karoline felt a mix of shock and anger surge through her. It made sense now. The judge's blatant disregard for her arguments, his eagerness to dismiss her evidence. He wasn't just biased, he was compromised. Why are you showing me this? She asked, her voice low. Because I want to help, Daniel replied. You've got the evidence against Apex, but if we don't expose this corruption, the case won't go anywhere. I can publish the video, but it'll be stronger if you back it up in court. Karoline hesitated, weighing the risks. If they went public with this information, it could blow the case wide open, or it could backfire spectacularly. Judge Wells would fight back, and the media circus would overshadow the real issue, holding Apex accountable. But what choice did she have? Without exposing the truth, justice would remain out of reach. All right, she said finally, her voice firm. But we need to be careful. If Judge Wells finds out, he'll try to shut us down. Daniel nodded. Understood. Let me handle the media side of things. You focus on keeping the pressure on in court. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. Karoline returned to her seat, her posture straighter, her expression resolute. She didn't look at Judge Wells directly, but she could feel his gaze boring into her. Whatever confidence he had displayed earlier seemed to waver slightly, though whether it was due to guilt or annoyance she couldn't tell. When the session resumed, Karoline rose to continue her presentation. This time, she didn't hold back. She laid out the damning internal documents piece by piece, connecting the dots between Apex's actions and the health crises plaguing nearby communities. Each slide she displayed on the projector screen painted a clearer picture of corporate greed run amok. The audience listened intently, many scribbling notes or whispering to their neighbors. Judge Wells grew increasingly agitated. He interrupted her multiple times, his voice rising with each objection. This is irrelevant, he snapped at one point, slamming his gavel down hard enough to make the sound echo through the room. Stick to the facts, Ms. Leavitt. The facts are right here, Your Honor, Karoline shot back, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. These emails show exactly how Apex covered up their crimes. Are you saying we shouldn't discuss the truth? The gallery erupted in murmurs, some applauding softly while others gasped at her audacity. Judge Wells glared at her, his face reddening. Watch your tone, young lady, he growled. I won't tolerate disrespect in my courtroom. Karoline met his gaze without flinching. With respect, Your Honor, the only disrespect here is toward the victims whose voices you refuse to hear. The tension in the room was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. Spectators exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to cheer or stay silent. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting near the baton at his side. Meanwhile, Daniel sat quietly in the back row, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He had already sent the video to several trusted contacts in the media, along with a brief summary of what he'd uncovered. Now, all he could do was wait. He knew that once the footage went live, chaos would ensue, and he wanted to be there, to see it happen. As Karoline wrapped up her argument, Judge Wells leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the bench. Enough, he barked, cutting her off mid-sentence. This farce has gone on long enough. I'm dismissing these so-called evidence items outright. The defense will proceed. The gallery erupted in outrage, voices overlapping in protest. Karoline stood frozen, her heart sinking as she realized the scope of the injustice unfolding before her. But before anyone could react further, the doors burst open, and a group of federal marshals entered the room. Their presence silenced the crowd instantly. One of the marshals approached the bench, addressing Judge Wells directly. "Your Honor, we need you to step outside with us." Wells's face turned pale, his composure cracking for the first time. "On what grounds?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "This is outrageous." "We'll explain outside," the marshal replied firmly, gesturing toward the exit. Reluctantly, Judge Wells stood, his movements stiff and mechanical. As he passed by the gallery, he avoided making eye contact with anyone, his usual arrogance replaced by panic. Karoline watched in stunned silence as the judge was escorted out of the courtroom. She turned to Daniel, who gave her a small, knowing nod. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The tide had turned. Justice might still be elusive, but the truth was finally coming to light. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like bees, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Within minutes, the scandal dominated headlines across the country. Clips of the video circulated online, sparking outrage and calls for accountability. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice over greed and no more corruption." Inside, Karoline took a moment to collect herself. She felt a strange mix of triumph and apprehension. Exposing Judge Wells was a victory, but it was only the beginning. The fight against Apex Industries was far from over, and the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Still, she allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Daniel joined her shortly after, his phone buzzing non-stop with notifications. "Looks like your case is going viral," he said with a grin. "People are rallying behind you." Karoline nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not about me. It's about the victims. If this helps them get the justice they deserve, then it's worth it." Together, they stepped outside to face the crowd. Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic din. Karoline raised a hand, signaling for quiet. When the noise subsided, she spoke clearly and confidently, her words carrying a weight that silenced even the most skeptical critics. "This isn't just about one corrupt judge or one greedy corporation," she declared. "It's about standing up for what's right, no matter how powerful the opposition may seem. We won't stop until justice is served, for everyone." The crowd erupted in cheers, their applause echoing through the streets. For Karoline, it was a reminder of why she had chosen this path in the first place. No matter how daunting the odds, the fight for justice was always worth it. The courtroom was in chaos. Federal marshals had taken Judge Gregory Wells away, leaving behind a stunned silence that quickly gave way to murmurs of disbelief and outrage. Spectators exchanged wide-eyed glances, their whispers growing louder, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Karoline Leavitt stood at the defense table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. She felt a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of vindication, but she also knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Daniel Harper remained seated in the back row, his phone buzzing incessantly with notifications from news outlets and social media platforms. The video he'd captured had gone viral within minutes, spreading like wildfire across the internet. Reporters outside were already calling it the scandal of the decade, and hashtags like Chan Justice for Karoline and Chan Expose Corruption trended on every major platform. But Daniel didn't let himself get distracted. He needed to stay focused. There was still work to do. As the bailiff tried to restore order, a senior court official stepped forward, clearing his throat loudly to grab everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice calm but firm, "due to unforeseen circumstances, today's proceedings will be suspended until further notice. A new judge will be assigned to oversee the case moving forward." The gallery erupted again, this time with a mix of cheers and groans. Some people clapped, clearly thrilled to see Judge Wells removed from power. Others grumbled about delays and red tape, worried that the momentum of the trial might be lost. Karoline, however, kept her composure. She gathered her papers methodically, tucking them into her briefcase while ignoring the reporters who swarmed around her, shoving microphones in her face. "Ms. Leavitt! Ms. Leavitt!" they shouted, their questions overlapping in a chaotic din. "How does it feel to expose corruption? What's next for your case? Do you think justice will prevail?" Karoline raised a hand, signaling for quiet. When the noise subsided slightly, she spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Today is a victory not just for me, but for everyone who has suffered because of Apex Industries' greed. This isn't about one corrupt judge. It's about holding powerful corporations accountable when they harm innocent people. We won't stop fighting until we achieve real justice." Her words earned another round of applause, but she didn't linger to soak up the praise. Instead, she turned and walked briskly toward the exit, where Daniel waited for her. Together, they pushed through the throng of reporters and stepped outside into the bright sunlight. Outside, the scene was even more chaotic. Protesters had gathered in droves, holding signs that read "Clean water for all" and "Stop corporate greed." Chants echoed through the streets. "Shame on Apex. Justice now." Television crews set up cameras, interviewing anyone willing to share their thoughts. Lawyers, activists, and concerned citizens mingled with the crowd, all united by a shared desire for change. Karoline paused for a moment, taking it all in. It was surreal to see so many people rallying behind her cause. For years, she'd fought battles that seemed impossible to win, often feeling like no one cared. Now, surrounded by supporters, she realized how much her work meant to others. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to stay strong. "This is incredible," she said softly, turning to Daniel. "I never imagined it would blow up like this." "It's because you're doing something important," Daniel replied, adjusting his glasses. "People are tired of being ignored. They want someone to stand up to the big guys, and you're showing them it's possible." Karoline nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. "But exposing Judge Wells doesn't mean we've won. Apex will fight back harder than ever. They'll try to discredit me, bury us in legal motions, or find some loophole to wiggle out of responsibility. That's why we need to keep pushing," Daniel said firmly. "The public is on your side now. Apex can't spin this story without looking guilty, and with the media spotlight on them, they'll have to tread carefully." Karoline smiled faintly, appreciating his optimism. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that things were far from resolved. Corruption ran deep, and taking down one judge wouldn't fix the systemic issues plaguing the legal system. But for now, she decided to focus on the positives. Every step forward mattered. Later that evening, Karoline met with Daniel in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe. They sat at a small table, laptops open and notebooks scattered between them. The day's events had left both of them drained, but there was no time to rest. They needed to strategize. "So, what's the plan?" Karoline asked, sipping her coffee. "We've got the public's attention, but how do we make sure it lasts?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table as he thought. "First, we need to keep the pressure on Apex. Tomorrow, I'll publish a detailed article laying out everything: the leaked documents, the bribes, the health impacts on communities. I'll include quotes from victims and experts to drive home the human cost of this disaster." "And second?" Karoline prompted. "Second, we push for systemic reforms," Daniel continued. "This scandal proves that judges aren't immune to corruption. We should call for stricter oversight, transparency in judicial appointments, and tougher penalties for misconduct. If we can channel public anger into concrete action, we might actually create lasting change." Karoline nodded, slowly liking the idea. "That could work. But we'll need allies, other lawyers, activists, maybe even politicians willing to champion the cause." "I've already reached out to a few contacts," Daniel admitted. "Some are hesitant, but most are interested. Once my article drops, I'm sure more will come on board." Before they could dive deeper into their plans, Karoline's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It was a text from an unknown number. "You don't know who you're messing with. Back off, or else." She showed it to Daniel, who frowned as well. "Do you think it's from Apex?" "It's possible," Karoline said, her voice tight. "Or maybe someone connected to Richard Cole. Either way, it's a threat." "We should report it to the authorities," Daniel suggested. "They'll take it seriously, especially after today's revelations." Karoline hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but if they think this will scare me into silence, they're wrong. I'm not backing down." The next morning, Daniel's article hit the front page of several major newspapers. Titled "Justice for Sale: How One Judge Sold Out to Corporate Greed," it painted a damning picture of Judge Wells's corruption and its connection to Apex Industries. The piece included excerpts from the leaked documents, photos of the bribe exchange, and first-hand accounts from victims of the contamination. By midday, it had been shared millions of times online, sparking renewed calls for accountability. Apex Industries issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, claiming the allegations were baseless attacks designed to smear our reputation. But the damage was done. Shareholders panicked, stock prices plummeted, and executives scrambled to contain the fallout. Meanwhile, federal investigators launched a formal inquiry into the company's practices, citing the mounting evidence as justification for intervention. Back at her office, Karoline worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase of the trial. With a new judge overseeing the case, she knew she'd have a better chance of presenting her arguments fairly. Still, she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Apex's lawyers were notorious for their aggressive tactics, and she anticipated a fierce battle ahead. That evening, as she packed up her things to head home, her phone rang. It was Daniel. "Hey," he said, his tone cautious. "I wanted to warn you. I just heard from a source that Richard Cole skipped town. He's vanished." Karoline froze, her heart sinking. "What? Are you sure?" "Positive," Daniel replied. "No one knows where he is. My guess is he's trying to avoid getting caught up in the investigation." "Great," Karoline muttered, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Just what we needed, a key player going rogue." "Don't worry," Daniel assured her. "He can run, but he can't hide forever, especially not with the whole world watching." Karoline sighed, rubbing her temples. "I hope you're right, because if he gets away with this, it'll send the worst message. That the rich and powerful are untouchable." "They're not untouchable," Daniel said firmly. "Not anymore. Not if we keep fighting." Karoline smiled faintly, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thanks, Daniel. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd probably manage just fine," he joked. "But hey, I'm glad to help." As they hung up, Karoline stared out the window at the city skyline, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles and setbacks. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Change was possible, if enough people believed in it and refused to give up. And she wasn't about to stop now. The days following Judge Wells's arrest were a whirlwind of activity for Karoline Leavitt. The public outcry over the scandal had reached a fever pitch, and every news outlet seemed to have a story about corruption in the legal system or corporate greed. Apex Industries, once seen as untouchable, was now under intense scrutiny. Protesters marched outside their headquarters, holding signs that read, "Stop poisoning our water and justice over profits." Even politicians who had previously ignored the issue were suddenly calling for investigations and reforms. Karoline spent long hours preparing for the next phase of the trial. With Judge Laura Bennett, a respected jurist known for her fairness, now presiding over the case, she felt more confident about presenting her evidence. But confidence didn't mean complacency. Apex's legal team was formidable, and they weren't going down without a fight. They filed countless motions trying to delay the proceedings or have key pieces of evidence excluded. Every day brought new challenges, but Karoline refused to be intimidated. Daniel Harper worked tirelessly alongside her, publishing article after article that kept the pressure on Apex. His exposés revealed even more damning details about the company's practices, including internal memos showing how executives knowingly prioritized profits over safety. One particularly explosive report detailed how Richard Cole, the lobbyist who had bribed Judge Wells, had been involved in similar schemes with other corporations. Though Cole remained missing, his reputation was in tatters, and rumors swirled that he was hiding overseas. Despite the mounting evidence against Apex, Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The company's lawyers seemed almost too eager to drag out the trial, filing endless objections and demanding adjournments. It was as if they were buying time for something or someone to intervene. She voiced her concerns to Daniel during one of their late-night strategy sessions at her office. "They're stalling," Karoline said, pacing back and forth. "Every motion, every objection, it's all designed to slow us down. But why? What are they waiting for?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table. "Maybe they're hoping public interest will die down. Scandals like this tend to fade eventually. Or maybe they're expecting a miracle," Karoline replied, stopping mid-step. "What if they've got another judge in their pocket, or a politician willing to step in and shut this whole thing down?" Daniel frowned, considering the possibility. "It's not impossible. Corruption doesn't exist in a vacuum. If Apex has connections high enough up the ladder—" He trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Karoline nodded grimly. "We need to stay vigilant. If we let our guard down, they'll find a way to twist this in their favor." The trial resumed 2 weeks later, drawing even larger crowds to the courthouse. Spectators packed the gallery, eager to see how the case would unfold under Judge Bennett's supervision. Reporters lined up outside, cameras rolling as Karoline and Apex's lawyers entered the building. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation. Judge Bennett wasted no time asserting her authority. A stern woman in her 50s with sharp features and an unshakable demeanor, she made it clear from the outset that she wouldn't tolerate delays or theatrics. When Apex's lead attorney, a slick-talking man named Victor Lane, tried to argue for yet another postponement, Judge Bennett cut him off sharply. "This court is here to administer justice, Mr. Lane, not to indulge in endless procedural games," she declared, slamming her gavel for emphasis. "Proceed with your opening statement, or I will rule accordingly." Victor Lane flashed a tight smile, clearly unaccustomed to being reprimanded. He adjusted his tie and launched into a polished speech, painting Apex as a misunderstood victim of baseless accusations. According to him, the contamination was an unfortunate accident, not deliberate negligence. He dismissed the leaked documents as cherry-picked emails taken out of context, and accused Karoline of orchestrating a smear campaign. Karoline listened intently, taking notes as Lane spoke. When it was her turn to present, she approached the podium with calm determination. Her voice steady and measured, she dismantled Lane's arguments one by one. She showed how the emails formed part of a broader pattern of deceit, pointing out inconsistencies in Apex's official reports and highlighting testimony from former employees who had witnessed illegal dumping firsthand. As the day wore on, the contrast between the two sides became increasingly stark. While Lane relied on vague denials and technical jargon, Karoline grounded her arguments in facts and human stories. She introduced video testimonials from victims, their faces etched with pain as they described the illnesses they'd suffered due to contaminated water. One elderly woman broke down in tears as she recounted losing her husband to cancer, a disease linked to the toxins in their drinking supply. The impact on the jury was undeniable. Several members wiped away tears while others exchanged solemn glances. Even Judge Bennett seemed moved, her expression softening as she listened to the heartbreaking accounts. For the first time, it felt like the tide might truly be turning in Karoline's favor. Outside the courthouse, the media circus continued unabated. Protesters held vigils for the victims, lighting candles and chanting slogans. Activists handed out flyers urging people to contact their representatives and demand stricter environmental regulations. Meanwhile, Apex's PR team scrambled to counter the narrative, releasing carefully crafted statements that portrayed the company as a responsible corporate citizen unfairly targeted by activists. But no amount of spin could erase the growing mountain of evidence against them. Federal investigators had uncovered additional proof of wrongdoing, including falsified inspection reports and secret meetings between Apex executives and government officials. Public opinion shifted decisively against the company, with polls showing overwhelming support for holding them accountable. Back in the courtroom, tensions ran high. Victor Lane grew increasingly desperate, resorting to personal attacks in an attempt to undermine Karoline's credibility. During cross-examination, he questioned her motives, suggesting she was pursuing the case for fame rather than justice. "Isn't it convenient," he sneered, "that you only took on this case after it became a national scandal?" Karoline met his gaze calmly, refusing to rise to the bait. "My motives aren't relevant, Mr. Lane," she replied. "What matters is the truth. And the truth is that Apex Industries poisoned innocent people for profit. That's what this trial is about." Her composure only seemed to frustrate Lane further. By the end of the day, his polished facade had cracked, revealing flashes of irritation beneath. Judge Bennett noticed, warning him to maintain decorum or risk sanctions. The message was clear. Bullying tactics wouldn't work in her courtroom. That evening, Karoline and Daniel met at a quiet diner near the courthouse. Both looked exhausted, dark circles under their eyes betraying the toll the case was taking on them. Still, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. Things were finally moving in the right direction. "I think we're winning," Daniel said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "The jury seems to be siding with you, and the public. Backlash against Apex is stronger than ever." "We're not there yet," Karoline cautioned, though a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Apex won't give up easily. They'll throw everything they've got at us before this is over. And we'll keep fighting back," Daniel said firmly. "Together." Karoline nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. "You know, when I started this case, I never imagined it would blow up like this. Sometimes I wonder if I'm ready for all this attention." "You are," Daniel assured her. "You've earned it. People believe in you because you're standing up for what's right. Don't doubt yourself now." She smiled faintly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, she knew she wasn't alone. Together, she and Daniel had sparked a movement, one that was bigger than either of them. And as long as they kept pushing forward, justice might finally prevail. As they left the diner, the city lights twinkled around them, casting a warm glow over the streets. Despite the challenges ahead, Karoline felt a flicker of hope. Change was possible if enough people refused to look away, and she wasn't about to stop looking anytime soon. The final days of the trial were a blur of tension and anticipation. The courtroom buzzed with energy, every seat filled as spectators leaned forward in their chairs, hanging on every word spoken. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, while cameras clicked incessantly outside the courthouse. For Karoline Leavitt, it felt like the culmination of months, years even, of relentless effort. She had poured her heart into this case, and now everything rested on the jury's verdict. Judge Laura Bennett maintained strict control over the proceedings, ensuring that both sides adhered to the rules. Apex Industries' lead attorney, Victor Lane, grew increasingly agitated as the trial neared its conclusion. His attempts to discredit Karoline's evidence had failed, his theatrics falling flat under Judge Bennett's watchful eye. In contrast, Karoline remained composed, delivering her closing arguments with clarity and conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. "This case is not just about holding Apex Industries accountable. It's about protecting our communities, our families, and our future. Every document, every testimony, every piece of evidence shows one thing. Apex knew what they were doing. They chose profit over people, greed over safety. And because of their actions, innocent lives have been destroyed." She paused, looking directly at the jurors. "You have the power to send a message, not just to Apex, but to every corporation that thinks it can act without consequences. Justice isn't blind, it sees everything, and today you have the chance to make sure it prevails." Her words resonated deeply. Several jurors nodded subtly, their expressions thoughtful. Across the room, Victor Lane shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual confidence replaced by unease. When it was his turn to speak, he tried to rally one last defense, painting Apex as a misunderstood entity caught in a storm of misinformation. But his arguments lacked substance, and even he seemed to realize it. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers, applause echoing through the space. Tears streamed down Karoline's face as she stood frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Justice had been served, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to give hope to those who needed it most. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the trial dominated headlines. Apex Industries faced crippling fines and lawsuits from affected communities. Shareholders abandoned the company en masse, sending stock prices plummeting. Executives resigned in disgrace, their reputations irreparably tarnished. Federal investigators continued their probe, uncovering layers of corruption that extended far beyond Judge Wells and Richard Cole. For Karoline, the victory was bittersweet. While she celebrated the outcome of the trial, she couldn't forget the human cost of Apex's crimes, the lives lost, the illnesses endured, the suffering that could never be undone. Still, she found solace in knowing that her work had made a difference. Families who had once felt powerless now saw that change was possible if they stood together. Daniel Harper played a crucial role in amplifying the impact of the case. His articles sparked national conversations about corporate accountability and judicial integrity. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and oversight within the legal system. Activists organized protests and campaigns, demanding stricter environmental regulations. The ripple effects of Karoline's fight spread far beyond the courtroom, igniting a movement for justice. Karoline became a symbol of resilience and determination. Invitations poured in from universities, advocacy groups, and media outlets eager to hear her story. She accepted some, using these platforms to highlight the importance of standing up against injustice. Her speeches were heartfelt and inspiring, urging others to believe in the power of persistence. "You don't have to be extraordinary to make a difference," she often said. "You just have to care enough to try. Sometimes, that's enough to start something big." Despite the accolades, Karoline remained grounded. She returned to her law practice, taking on cases involving environmental protection and civil rights. Each new challenge reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place: to give a voice to those who had none. Daniel stayed close to the story, continuing to investigate corruption wherever he found it. He and Karoline developed a deep friendship, united by their shared commitment to truth and justice. Together, they formed an informal alliance with activists, journalists, and lawyers dedicated to systemic reform. Their network grew rapidly, fueled by public demand for accountability. One evening, months after the trial ended, Karoline and Daniel met at a park near the courthouse. It was a crisp autumn night, the air cool and refreshing. Leaves crunched beneath their feet as they walked along a quiet path, the city skyline glowing faintly in the distance. "I still can't believe how much has changed," Karoline said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "A year ago, I thought I was fighting a losing battle. Now look at us." "It's not over," Daniel reminded her gently. "There's still so much work to do. Corruption doesn't disappear overnight." "I know," Karoline replied, smiling wistfully. "But moments like this remind me why we keep going. Even when it feels impossible, progress happens. People wake up. They start asking questions. And slowly, things begin to change." Daniel nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "You've inspired a lot of people, Karoline, including me." "You've done the same for me," she said sincerely. "Without your help, none of this would have happened. We make a pretty good team." They laughed softly, the sound mingling with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. For a moment, they simply stood there, enjoying the quiet camaraderie. Then Karoline glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should get back," she said reluctantly. "Early morning tomorrow." "Same here," Daniel agreed. Big article deadline. As they parted ways, Karoline felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned that justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one step at a time. And as long as there were people willing to take those steps, no matter how daunting, the world could become a better place. Back home, Karoline sat by her window, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. She thought about the victims she had fought for, the allies she had gained, and the battles yet to come. A small smile crossed her lips as she whispered to herself, almost like a promise,